Welcome back to Mr. Midnight. You know what's crazy? Most people think Alaska is just cold and remote. But there's something else up there that nobody talks about. For 2 months every winter, the sun completely disappears. I'm not talking about short days, I mean total darkness. 67 days straight where it never gets light. And during those 67 days, people start changing. Tonight, I've got 7 stories that'll make you understand why Alaskans don't like talking about polar night. These aren't folklore or campfire tales. These happened in 2023 and 2024. Real people, real incidents. Some of them are still trying to recover. There's one story here about a graveyard shift that went so wrong, the person had to flee the state entirely. Another one involves a rescue that should have been routine, until the radio started playing back someone's own voice calling for help. I'm not going to spoil anything else. But I will say this, after you hear what happens when humans are stuck in complete darkness for weeks, you'll never look at winter the same way. If you're new here, subscribe to Mr. Midnight. We cover the real horror that doesn't make it to the news. Hit the bell icon too. Alright, let's get into it. Story number 1 takes us to a 24-hour store in Fairbanks. My name is Jenny Walsh, and I've been working retail for 3 years now. Started when I was 16, moved up to shift supervisor at Fred Meyer in Fairbanks by 18. I've handled everything, drunk customers, shoplifters, even a guy who tried to rob us with a broken bottle. I thought I could deal with anything the graveyard shift could throw at me. But polar night in Alaska, that's not just darkness. That's something else entirely. What happened during January 15th through 22nd, 2024, taught me that some hungers can't be satisfied, and some cravings will drive you to do things that'll haunt you forever. Most people don't understand what polar night does to your body and mind. In Fairbanks, the sun disappears for 2 months. Not just short days. Complete darkness for 67 days straight. Your brain stops making the chemicals it needs. Your bones start dissolving because your body can't process calcium without vitamin D. Doctors call it seasonal affective disorder, but they don't tell you about the cravings. The desperate, gnawing hunger for minerals. Your body is literally eating from your own skeleton. I work alone from midnight to 8 a.m. at the only 24-hour store in the area. The building is this massive concrete box with buzzing fluorescent lights that flicker every few seconds. The heating system makes this constant grinding noise, like metal being chewed. During polar night, we get the desperate ones. People who can't sleep, can't think straight, buying whatever they hope might help them feel human again. That Monday night started normal. Around 1 a.m., a pregnant woman came in with a cart full of antacids. I'm talking 40 bottles of Tums, plus sidewalk chalk, and calcium supplements stacked 3 feet high. When I started scanning, she grabbed my wrist hard enough to leave fingerprint bruises. "Don't judge me," she whispered, and I saw her teeth, ground down to tiny yellow nubs with dark stains around her gums. "You'll understand soon." I watched her through the windows, sitting in her car, eating chalk like breadsticks. She'd bite off chunks and chew them slowly, eyes rolled back like it was the most delicious thing she'd ever tasted. White powder fell from her mouth onto her pregnant belly, but she couldn't stop. The next customer bought 12 containers of calcium powder and started mixing it with snow in the parking lot, making this chalky slush that he drank straight. When I went outside to check on him, he looked up at me with bloodshot eyes and said, "I can feel my bones disappearing. Can you feel yours?" That's when I first noticed the taste in my mouth. Metallic and bitter. I'd been unconsciously chewing on my pen, and the plastic cap was completely destroyed. My gums were bleeding, but the taste of my own blood mixed with plastic felt right, satisfying in a way that scared me. Wednesday night, Marcus found bite marks on every shopping cart handle, deep gouges where people had chewed the metal down to bright silver. When I mentioned it to him, he pulled up his sleeves. His forearms were covered in small cuts and bite marks. "I've been doing it too," he admitted. "Started with the metal shelving brackets. Then I found out the cart handles taste better, something about the zinc coating." He laughed, but it sounded hollow. I told myself it was just stress, but I crave it now. Dream about it. A customer came in around 3 a.m. and went straight to the dairy section. She grabbed a gallon of milk and bit through the plastic jug like it was paper. Milk sprayed everywhere as she drank, plastic shards cutting her lips, but she didn't stop until the container was empty. When I approached her, she looked at me with wild desperation. "I can smell the calcium in your teeth," she said, milk and blood running down her chin. "It smells so rich, so clean." She took a step toward me, and I backed away fast. I called my manager, but he just sighed. "It's polar night, Jenny. People get weird. As long as they pay for what they break, just let them be." But they weren't paying. I found a woman in the pharmacy section who'd broken open every bottle of calcium pills we had. She was eating them by the handful, crying as the sharp edges cut her mouth and throat. Blood streamed down her neck, but she couldn't stop swallowing them. "It's not enough," she sobbed, showing me her hands. Her fingernails were completely gone, bitten down to raw flesh. "Nothing's enough. I need more. I need what's inside." That night, I caught myself chewing on a shopping cart handle during my break. The zinc coating tasted sweet and metallic, and every bite sent this warm satisfaction through my chest. I'd gnawed off a piece about the size of a quarter before I realized what I was doing. When I tried to stop, my hands started shaking. Friday night brought a family, parents, and a little girl, maybe 5 years old. They went to the garden center, and the parents started feeding their daughter concrete mix. She'd grab handfuls of the gray powder and stuff it in her mouth while they encouraged her. "Good girl, Emma. Get the minerals your bones need," the mother cooed, stroking the child's hair as concrete dust fell from her tiny mouth. The girl's teeth were worn down to brown stubs, but she kept eating, tears streaming down her cheeks. I tried to intervene, but the father turned on me with a snarl. "She needs it. We all need it. You can smell it too, can't you? The calcium, it's calling to us." He was right. I could smell it. Rich and mineral sweet, coming from their bones underneath their skin. My mouth started watering, and I had to grip the checkout counter to stop myself from reaching for the little girl's arm. Saturday night, I found myself looking forward to work in a way that terrified me. I'd hidden metal files under my register, the kind used for car repair, because chewing on them gave me more satisfaction than food. My gums bled constantly now, but the taste of iron mixed with zinc had become a craving that consumed my thoughts. Around 2 a.m., a group of 8 customers entered together. They moved wrong, like they were all connected somehow. They spread through the store, and I heard the sounds immediately: breaking glass, tearing plastic, and something else. Chewing. Wet, desperate chewing. I watched the security monitors as they attacked the calcium supplements, fighting each other for bottles and eating the pills like candy. But then it escalated. One customer grabbed another's arm and bit down hard enough to break skin. The victim didn't fight back, just cried and said, "I understand, take what you need." More customers arrived, drawn by something I couldn't identify but felt in my bones. They poured through the automatic doors like they'd been summoned. The ones already inside started attacking each other, biting exposed skin, trying to get to bone underneath. But this wasn't mindless violence. They were completely aware, apologizing even as they bit down. "I'm sorry," a businessman said as he gnawed on a woman's wrist. "I can smell the calcium in your bones. I need it. My skeleton is dissolving." The woman nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I know. I can smell yours too. We can share." I backed toward the office, but my legs felt unsteady. I'd been chewing on a metal file for the past hour, and the taste of blood and zinc made everything feel distant and dreamlike. Through the office window, I could see customers biting each other's arms, legs, anywhere they could access bone. The sound was horrible, not screaming, but wet crunching mixed with grateful sobbing. That's when I noticed the bottle of liquid calcium on the desk. Industrial strength, meant for mixing with cattle feed. The label warned about human consumption, but I couldn't stop myself. I opened it and drank the entire quart in desperate gulps. It burned going down, but the relief was immediate. The craving stopped. My hands stopped shaking. For the first time in days, I could think clearly. And what I saw terrified me. The customers weren't just biting each other anymore. They were working together, using their teeth to expose bone, then taking turns gnawing on the calcium-rich areas. A group had pinned down an elderly man and were systematically chewing on his fingers, careful not to damage too much flesh, just accessing the bone underneath. The man wasn't fighting, he was directing them. "The joints have more calcium," he instructed calmly. "Try my knuckles." Through the glass, I could see Marcus in aisle 7, on his hands and knees. letting customers bite his shins while he gnawed on someone else's ankle. His eyes met mine through the window, and he mouthed, "Help us." But I couldn't move. The calcium supplement was making me sick, burning my throat and stomach, but I could feel it working. My bones felt solid again. The desperate hunger faded, replaced by nausea and the horrible understanding of what I'd almost become. When the sun came up, not that you could see it, the customers just stopped. Like a switch had been flipped. They looked around at the blood and bite marks covering their bodies, confused and horrified. Most walked out quietly, leaving trails of blood on the white linoleum. Marcus was taken to the hospital with severe blood loss and over 40 bite wounds. He survived, but the infection in his bones never completely healed. He walks with a cane now and has to take calcium supplements for the rest of his life. I gave my notice that morning. My manager didn't ask questions, just nodded and said they'd had trouble keeping night shift workers during polar night for years. I moved to Phoenix 2 weeks later, but the damage was already done. The industrial calcium supplement destroyed my stomach lining and damaged my kidneys permanently. I can't process dairy products anymore, and I have to take medication to keep my bones from dissolving. But the worst part is the dreams. Every night, I dream about the taste of metal and bone. I wake up with bleeding gums because I've been grinding my teeth, trying to recreate that satisfaction I felt when chewing zinc and iron. Sometimes I catch myself staring at people's wrists, wondering what the calcium in their bones would taste like. I work in a library now. No food, no metal shelving I can access. My coworkers think I have an eating disorder because I bring soft foods and never eat in the break room. They don't understand that I can't trust myself around anything that might taste like minerals. Last winter, I got a call from someone in Fairbanks, another night shift worker who'd found my number somehow. She was crying, saying she'd been eating drywall and couldn't stop. Her teeth were wearing down, and she was starting to look at her coworkers differently. "I can smell their bones," she whispered into the phone. "What do I do?" I told her to run. Leave Alaska before the real hunger starts, before you start seeing other people as sources of calcium instead of human beings. She hung up. I never found out what happened to her. Every winter, I read news reports from Alaska. Missing persons during polar night, medical emergencies involving mineral consumption, mass hospitalizations for calcium poisoning. The articles never mention what really happens when people are desperate enough and hungry enough for minerals that their own bodies can't produce. If you ever find yourself in Alaska during polar night and you start craving chalk or metal or concrete, get out immediately. Don't wait to see if it gets better. Don't think you can control it, because once you can smell the calcium in people's bones, once you understand how much you need what's inside them, you won't be able to see them as human anymore. The polar night doesn't just take away the sun. It takes away everything that makes you civilized, everything that keeps you from eating each other alive, and the hunger never really goes away. My name is Tyler Nash, and I've been working security for 6 years now. Started right out of high school when my dad got laid off from the Fairbanks pipeline and we needed the money. Mom was fighting cancer at the time, and those medical bills don't pay themselves. I chose security because it paid decent, had health insurance, and I liked working alone. Always been a loner, even as a kid. Maybe it's because I grew up in a house where every conversation was either about money we didn't have or treatments that weren't working. I've worked everything from mall security to construction sites to government buildings. Seen drunks, drug addicts, break-ins, fights. Hell, I once caught a guy trying to steal copper wire from a live electrical box. He was lucky I found him before the electricity did. I thought I'd seen the worst of what people could do to themselves and each other. But what happened during my assignment at the Usabelli coal mine in Healy, Alaska during the polar night of January 2024 didn't just change what I thought I knew about security work. It changed what I thought I knew about reality itself. About what human beings can become when they're forgotten long enough. The job posting came through my agency in December. Overnight security, remote location, premium winter rates. They were offering double my normal pay, plus hazard pay for working in subarctic conditions. After 6 years of barely scraping by, that money looked like a golden ticket. My girlfriend Sarah thought I was crazy for taking it, but she didn't understand. With Mom's medical debt still hanging over us and Dad drinking away what little savings we had left, I couldn't afford to turn down that kind of money. The Usabelli mine shut down in 2008 when coal prices crashed, but the tunnels are still there. Miles and miles of them, some going down 400 feet. The mining company still owns the land, and every winter they have problems with people trying to use the tunnels for shelter. When you're homeless in Alaska and it's 40 below, an abandoned mine starts looking like the Ritz-Carlton. The site manager, Jake Kowalski, met me at the main office on my first day. Jake had that weathered look you see on guys who've spent their whole lives in Alaska. Deep lines around his eyes, hands like leather, and a way of speaking that made every word sound important. "Look, Tyler," he said as he handed me the keys. "This isn't like guarding a shopping mall. We're 27 miles from the nearest neighbor. Cell service is spotty. If something goes wrong, help is at least an hour away, assuming the roads are clear." He showed me around the surface buildings, the main office where I'd spend most of my time, a maintenance shed, and the sealed entrances to the mine tunnels. Heavy steel gates welded shut, warning signs in 3 languages. The place felt like a tomb. "The tunnels go deep," Jake continued, "and they connect in ways that even the old maps don't show completely." Miners were always digging new passages, following coal seams wherever they led. Some of those passages were never properly mapped before the mine closed. The security system was more sophisticated than I expected. Cameras throughout the tunnel system, motion sensors, even some kind of seismic monitoring equipment that detected ground movement. Jake explained that the company was worried about tunnel collapse affecting the surface buildings. "The insurance company requires 24-hour monitoring," he said. "Most of the time it's boring work, but during polar night we get desperate people trying to get underground. Your job is to keep them out. For their safety and ours." That first week was exactly what Jake had described: boring. The polar night up there isn't just regular darkness. It's this thick, crushing blackness that seems to have weight. The only light comes from the few work lamps around the buildings, and whatever flashlight you're carrying. By day 3, I understood why they called it the long night. Your body starts forgetting what sunshine feels like. I developed a routine. Walk the perimeter every hour, check the tunnel entrance gates, monitor the security feeds, and spend the rest of the time in the heated office reading or watching downloaded movies on my laptop. The internet connection was satellite-based and slower than dial-up, but it worked. The mine's history was darker than Jake had let on. I found old newspaper articles in the office files about accidents over the years. Cave-ins that trapped miners for days. A gas explosion in 1987 that killed 4 men. And something else? Reports of miners going missing in the deeper tunnels, their bodies never recovered. The official cause was always listed as lost in unmapped passages or presumed fallen into abandoned shaft. But what bothered me most were the incident reports from previous security guards. 3 different guards over the past 2 years had quit mid-assignment, all citing psychological stress and unexplained phenomena. One guard, a guy named Marcus Webb, had written a detailed report about persistent machinery sounds from sealed tunnel sections and voices speaking in languages that weren't quite English. Jake had never mentioned any of this. The first sign that something was wrong came on my 4th night. I was doing my midnight check of the tunnel entrances when I noticed something off about entrance number 7. The snow around the gate looked disturbed, not wind-blown, but deliberately moved. Like something had been digging. I crouched down with my flashlight and felt my stomach drop. There were footprints in the snow, but they were wrong. Human-shaped, but elongated, with deep gouges at the toe end that looked like claw marks. The prints were fresh. No snow had blown into them yet. But here's what really scared me. The prints came from inside the gate. Whatever made them had come out of the sealed tunnel. I followed the trail with my flashlight. The prints led away from the mine entrance for about 30 yards, then just stopped. Not like they were covered by snow or blown away. They just ended, as if whatever made them had simply vanished into the air. I radioed Jake, but got no response. Not unusual. Radio coverage was spotty in that area, especially during the electromagnetic storms that happened during polar night. I made detailed notes and took photos, planning to show him when he made his weekly check. The next night, the security cameras started picking up movement in the tunnels. Not just any tunnels, the deep ones, sections that were supposed to be completely sealed. I watched the monitors as shadowy figures moved through passages that, according to the mind maps, had no entrance points from the surface. The camera quality was poor, but I could make out shapes that walked upright but moved wrong. Too fluid in some ways, too jerky in others. When I tried to call the monitoring company that maintained the security system, I got a recorded message saying they were closed due to winter weather. I called Jake's emergency number and got straight to voicemail. That's when I started hearing the sounds. It began as a low humming, like generators running somewhere far underground. But according to the building schematics, there was no power running to the deep tunnel systems. The mine had been completely disconnected from the electrical grid when it closed. The humming would start around midnight and continue until dawn. Sometimes it would be joined by other sounds, rhythmic clanking like hammers on metal, scraping noises like tools against rock, and voices. Faint at first, but growing clearer each night. The voices were speaking English, but it was wrong somehow. Like people talking through water or with their mouths full. And they were using old mining terminology, words I had to look up in the mining manuals Jake had left in the office. Drift 7 needs expansion. Seam runs deeper than the maps show. New workers coming down tonight. The shift never ends. I started recording the sounds on my phone, but every time I hit record, the voices would stop immediately, like they knew I was listening. On my 6th night, I found the first body. I was doing my 2 a.m. perimeter check when I saw something dark in the snow about 50 yards from tunnel entrance number 3. At first I thought it was just a fallen branch, but as I got closer, I realized it was a human leg. The body belonged to a middle-aged homeless man, partially buried in the snow. He'd been there a while, maybe a week or 2, but what made me vomit right there in the snow wasn't how long he'd been dead. It was how he'd been eaten. The body showed bite marks, but not from any animal I'd ever seen. The pattern was human-sized, but the teeth had left serrated marks like a shark. Chunks of flesh had been torn away and consumed, but whoever, or whatever, had done it had avoided the organs. Like they knew which parts were safe to eat and which weren't. I called 911, but the emergency dispatcher said they couldn't send anyone until morning due to road conditions. I was told to secure the scene and wait for the state troopers. I spent the rest of that night in the office, watching the security monitors and trying not to think about what I'd found. That's when I saw them for the first time. 3 figures, moving through tunnel, section D7, about 200 feet underground. The camera quality was grainy, but I could make out enough detail to know they weren't normal people. They were tall, maybe 6.5 feet, but thin in a way that looked starved. Their movements were jerky, like marionettes being controlled by drunk puppeteers. And they were carrying tools, old-style mining equipment, pickaxes, shovels, hand drills. But the tools looked wrong, like they'd been modified or fused with their users somehow. The figures stopped directly under one of the cameras and looked up. Even through the poor video quality, I could see their faces clearly. They had been human once. You could still see the basic structure. Nose, mouth, eyes. But everything was wrong. Their skin was pale to the point of being translucent. Their eyes were huge and completely black, adapted for seeing in total darkness. Their mouths were too wide, filled with teeth that had been filed or worn into sharp points. But the most disturbing thing was the mining equipment. It wasn't just that they were carrying it, it was part of them. Hard hats that seemed to grow out of their skulls. Pickaxes that extended from their arms where hands should have been. Headlamps embedded directly into their foreheads, the wires disappearing under their skin. They looked directly into the camera for almost a full minute, as if they knew I was watching. Then one of them opened its mouth and spoke. The audio quality was terrible, but I could make out the words clearly. "New security man. Bring him to the deep shift." The state troopers arrived the next morning and took statements about the body. They seemed unsurprised. Apparently, they found bodies around the mine every winter. Homeless folks try to shelter in the tunnels, the senior trooper told me. Most of the time, they freeze to death before anything else gets them. When I asked what else might get them, he just shrugged. Bears, wolves. Sometimes people do desperate things to each other when they're starving. I showed them the security footage from the tunnels, but they weren't interested. Cameras malfunction all the time in this cold, the trooper said. You're probably seeing shadows and ice formations. Isolation can play tricks on your mind, especially during polar night. But I knew what I'd seen. And that night, they came to the surface. I was doing my 3 a.m. check when I saw them standing near tunnel entrance number 4. 5 of them this time, perfectly still in the darkness beyond the work lights. They looked like they'd been waiting for me. Up close, they were even more disturbing than they'd appeared on camera. Their skin wasn't just pale, it was translucent, showing dark veins underneath like old parchment. Their enlarged eyes reflected light like an animal's, and when they breathed, I could see vapor coming from their mouths and from holes in their necks that looked like old mine shaft ventilation systems. The mining equipment that was fused to their bodies looked functional. Hand tools that had been grafted onto arm bones, headlamps powered by some kind of organic battery system under their skin. One of them had what looked like a coal cart attached to its lower body instead of legs. They started walking toward me with that same jerky, unnatural movement I'd seen on camera. Not running, just advancing with mechanical precision. That's when I heard them talking to each other. Surface dweller found us. Bring him to deep shift. New worker for the seam. The shift never ends. Never ends, never ends. Their voices were human, but wrong. Like they were speaking through damaged vocal cords, or trying to remember how to form words with mouths that had been modified for other purposes. I ran back to the office and locked the door. But they followed me. I could hear them outside, scraping at the walls with their metal tools. The sounds went on for hours. Methodical, patient, like they were studying the building to find weak points. Around 5 a.m., the scraping stopped. I waited another hour before I worked up the courage to look outside. They were gone, but they'd left something behind. Scratched into the metal siding of the office building were symbols I didn't recognize and words in what looked like a mixture of English and some other language. But at the bottom, clear as day, were GPS coordinates. I looked up the coordinates on my laptop. They pointed to a section of the mine that wasn't on any of the official maps, a tunnel system that supposedly didn't exist. I should have left right then, should have packed my gear and driven back to Fairbanks and never looked back. But I thought about my mom's medical bills, about the money I was being paid to do this job, about what would happen to my family if I quit another job. So I made the stupidest decision of my life. I decided to go underground. The coordinates led me to a section of tunnel that had been marked as permanently sealed on all the mine maps. But when I got there, I found a gap in the steel barriers just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. The tunnel beyond the gap was different from the rest of the mine. The walls were roughly carved, like they'd been expanded by hand tools rather than proper mining equipment. And they were covered in more of those strange symbols I'd seen on the office building. I followed the tunnel for what felt like miles, going deeper and deeper underground. My flashlight beam seemed weaker down there, swallowed up by the darkness. The air smelled wrong, not just stale, but organic. Like something had been living there for a very long time. That's when I found the chamber. It was huge. Maybe the size of a football field, carved out of the rock in the deepest part of the mine. And it was full of them, dozens of the creatures I'd seen on the surface, but these looked like they'd been underground much longer. Some were so modified by their mining equipment that they were barely recognizable as human. Others looked fresher, like they'd been converted more recently. They were organized, working together to expand the chamber. Some were carving new tunnels with tools that had been grafted to their bodies. Others were hauling coal and rock in carts that had been fused to their torsos. And at the center of it all was something that had once been human, but was now more machine than man. A foreman figure covered in mining equipment, with cables and wires running directly into its brain. The foreman looked up when I entered the chamber, and I realized it was wearing a name tag that read Supervisor M. Kowalski, Marcus, the security guard who had quit 2 years ago and written those incident reports. He'd come down here to investigate, just like I had. "Welcome to the deep shift," he said, and his voice was like grinding metal. "We've been waiting for you." That's when I understood. They weren't evolved miners trapped by cave-ins. They were people who had been converted, turned into living mining equipment by something that had been sleeping in the deep tunnels for much longer than the mine had existed. The foreman gestured to the other creatures, and they started moving toward me. "The shift never ends," he said. "The work must continue. And we need new workers." I ran. I've never moved so fast in my life. Back through the tunnels, through the gap in the barriers, up to the surface, and straight to my truck. I didn't stop driving until I reached Fairbanks. and I didn't stop shaking for 3 days after that. When I tried to report what I'd found, nobody believed me. The mining company said I was suffering from isolation psychosis. Apparently it's common during polar night assignments. The state troopers said my incident report sounded like the plot of a horror movie. But here's the thing that keeps me awake at night. When I called to report that I was quitting, Jake Kowalski answered the phone. The real Jake Kowalski, who'd never heard of any Marcus Webb and had no idea what I was talking about when I mentioned the security guard who'd written those incident reports. Those reports had been forgeries. Written by something that wanted to make sure I knew about the voices, about the sounds, about what was happening in the deep tunnels. They'd been preparing me, leading me down there, step by step, and I'd walked right into it. I moved to Nevada the next month. Couldn't handle being underground anymore. Elevators, basements, even parking garages gave me panic attacks. But I started researching missing persons cases near abandoned mines, and what I found was worse than anything I'd experienced in Alaska. People disappear near old mines all the time, all across the country. Hikers, explorers, homeless people looking for shelter. The authorities always assume they fell down a shaft or got lost in unmapped tunnels. But what if that's not what happened? What if there are more places like Usabelli, more deep shifts that never ended? I've found reports of strange sounds from abandoned mines in Colorado, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, security guards quitting mid-assignment, reporting equipment malfunctions and psychological stress. Workers who go to investigate problems and are never seen again. And here's what really scares me. 6 months after I left Alaska, the Usabelli mine was sold to a new company. They're planning to reopen it for rare earth mineral extraction. They're hiring local workers and bringing in new equipment. They're sending fresh people down into those tunnels. I tried to warn them, called the new company, the state labor board, even the FBI. Nobody wants to listen to a security guard with a history of psychological incidents. They think I'm crazy. Maybe I am crazy. Maybe everything I saw down there was just isolation, psychosis, and polar night hallucinations. Maybe those creatures were just shadows, and my mind filled in the details. But if you ever find yourself working near an abandoned mine, especially during the dark months, listen for the sounds. The humming machinery where no power runs, the voices speaking in modified human speech, the scraping of tools against stone in places that are supposed to be empty. And if you hear them calling about the deep shift that never ends, don't go investigating. Don't try to be a hero. Just run. Because the shift is always looking for new workers. And once you join, the work never, ever stops. The mine in Alaska is still operating. They've hired dozens of local workers, and according to their press releases, production is ahead of schedule. But if you check the missing persons reports for the area, you'll notice something interesting. Nobody's gone missing near the mine since they reopened. Not a single homeless person, hiker, or trespasser. Which means either they've finally secured the area properly, or they don't need to hunt anymore. They have all the workers they need. My name is Jessica Murphy, and I need to tell someone what really happens during polar night in Alaska before I lose my mind completely. I've been an ice road trucker for 7 years, but what I experienced in February 2024 wasn't just some creature attack. It was something far worse, something that's still happening to me, even now, 300 miles south of the Arctic Circle. They call it polar night, when the sun doesn't rise for months, when Alaska becomes this endless black void that swallows everything. Most people think it's just dark, but they're wrong. Darkness isn't empty. It's full of things that have been waiting, planning, evolving in the cold for thousands of years. And they don't just want to kill you, they want to become you. I started driving the Dalton Highway ice roads in 2017 after my divorce. Good pay, isolation, and honestly, I was running from my own life. Ice road trucking means hauling 80,000 pounds across frozen lakes, where one mistake drops you through the ice to die in black water. But the money was incredible. $100,000 for 3 months of work, and I was good at it. Really good. The North Slope oil facilities need constant supply runs during the coldest months when the ground is frozen, solid enough to support our rigs. I drove a specially winterized 2019 Peterbilt 389 with dual heating systems, satellite communication, and emergency survival gear rated for -60 degrees. My route was 400 miles of wilderness, no cell towers, no towns, just endless white nothing and the occasional research station. February 3rd, 2024. That's when everything started, though I didn't understand it then. I was hauling drilling equipment to Prudhoe Bay when dispatch radioed about missing drivers. 2 trucks had vanished on my exact route, Tom Bradley and Sarah Chen, both veterans with over 10 years' experience. Their GPS trackers showed they'd stopped around mile marker 240, but when the rescue team arrived, they found something impossible. The trucks were still there, engines running, cargo untouched, but the drivers were gone. What made it worse was what they found in the cabs. The seats were covered in this clear, thick fluid that looked like saliva, but it wasn't human saliva. It was too thick, too cold, and it had this chemical smell like ozone after lightning strikes. And there were recordings. Each truck's dash cam had captured the last moments, but the footage made no sense. The cameras showed the drivers talking to themselves, having full conversations with empty air. But here's the thing, their voices were wrong. Tom Bradley's voice was there, but underneath it, like an echo, was something else speaking the exact same words a fraction of a second later, matching his tone perfectly but just slightly off. I should have turned around right then, but I needed the money. And honestly, weird stuff happens in the Arctic all the time. Hypothermia makes people hallucinate, isolation plays tricks on your mind. The company briefed us about Arctic hysteria, a documented psychological condition where extreme cold and isolation cause paranoid delusions. I figured that's what happened to Tom and Sarah. I was wrong. Around midnight on February 4th, about 150 miles into the route, I stopped for my mandatory rest break at mile marker 210. That's when I first heard them talking. It started as whispers in my CB radio, just static with voices underneath, too low to make out words. Then my satellite phone started picking up conversations that shouldn't exist. Old radio transmissions from drivers who died years ago, their voices perfectly preserved, talking about road conditions from 2019, 2018, going back decades. But the voices were getting clearer, more recent. I heard Sarah Chen's voice, crystal clear, reporting her location as mile marker 240, exactly where they'd found her empty truck. "This is Ice Phoenix, northbound at marker 240, all clear," her voice said through my radio. "Weather's holding, road conditions good. Jessica, you there? Jessica, respond please." The thing is, Sarah had been missing for 3 days. I tried to respond, but when I keyed the mic, my own voice came back through the speaker, delayed by about 2 seconds, saying things I hadn't said. "Copy that, Sarah," my own voice responded without me speaking. "Everything's fine here. Just keep driving. Don't stop for anything." That's when I realized something was listening to all our transmissions, learning our voices, our speech patterns, our protocols, and it was getting better at being us. I started driving again, pushing my rig faster than safe on the icy road. But every few minutes, my own voice would come through the radio, having conversations with the missing drivers, reporting false positions, giving incorrect weather updates. It was like hearing an imperfect copy of myself, and the copy was getting more accurate with each transmission. Around 2 a.m., I saw the lights. They weren't vehicle headlights. They were too high off the ground, too blue, and they moved wrong. They started as distant points following parallel to the road, maybe half a mile out in the tree line. But they were keeping perfect pace with my truck, matching my speed exactly. When I slowed down, they slowed down. When I accelerated, they accelerated. Then I realized they weren't following me, they were hurting me. Every time I tried to take one of the emergency turnoffs, the lights would move to block my path, forcing me to stay on the main route. And slowly, very slowly, they were getting closer. What started as distant pinpricks were now clearly visible as large, reflective eyes, but the wrong shape for any animal I knew. Too large, too intelligent. And they blinked in perfect synchronization, like they were connected somehow. My CB crackled again. This time it was Tom Bradley's voice, but not quite right. "Jessica, this is Tom. I'm at the Coldfoot station. Where are you? I need to warn you about something." Tom had been missing for 4 days. Coldfoot Station had been abandoned since 2021. "Tom, is that really you?" I asked. "Yes, it's me. Listen carefully. Don't trust the rescue teams. They're not what they seem. The things in the ice, they can copy us, Jessica. They've been practicing. The voice was getting more accurate, but there were still tells. The rhythm was slightly off, and Tom had never called me Jessica. Everyone called me Jess. How do I know you're really Tom? I asked. There was a long pause. Then, because I know what you did in Fairbanks last Christmas. I know about the accident you covered up. I know about the family you killed. My blood went cold. I'd never been in an accident, never killed anyone. But the voice said it with such confidence, such intimate knowledge, that for a moment I questioned my own memory. That's when I understood what was really happening. They weren't just copying our voices, they were trying to copy our memories, our personalities, our entire identities, and they were getting the details wrong because they were working from incomplete information, filling in the gaps with lies and manipulation. But they were learning fast. I floored the accelerator, pushing my rig to dangerous speeds on the icy road. The lights stayed with me, but now there were more of them. Dozens of blue pinpricks spread out across the wilderness, all converging on my position, and my radio was going crazy. Voices of every driver who'd ever gone missing on this route, all talking at once, creating a cacophony of overlapping conversations about weather conditions, cargo manifests, personal details they shouldn't know. Then my fuel gauge started dropping. Fast. I pulled over to check the tanks and found precision cuts in the fuel lines. Too clean to be accidental damage, too precise to be animal claws. Something had crawled under my moving truck and made surgical incisions designed to strand me exactly where they wanted me. I had maybe 10 miles of fuel left, nowhere near enough to reach the next fuel depot. I was stuck in the middle of 400 miles of frozen wilderness with something that could mimic human voices, cut fuel lines with surgical precision, and coordinate complex hunting strategies. That's when I found the real Tom Bradley. He was sitting in his truck about 2 miles ahead, still behind the wheel, but something was terribly wrong with him. His eyes were open but completely white, rolled back in his head, and his mouth was moving constantly, making sounds that weren't quite words. As I got closer with my flashlight, I could see his lips were blue-black with frostbite, but he was still alive, still breathing. And he was talking in Sarah Chen's voice. "Help me," he said in Sarah's exact tone and inflection. "Please, Jessica, help me. I'm trapped at marker 240. Something's wrong with my truck." But Sarah's words were coming out of Tom's mouth, and Tom's eyes were rolled back like he was unconscious, or worse. I tried to wake him up, shook his shoulder, but he just kept talking in Sarah's voice, repeating the same distress calls over and over. Then I heard my own voice coming from the back of Tom's truck. "This is Jessica Murphy, northbound hauling equipment," my voice said from inside the empty trailer. "Weather's clear, road conditions good, no problems here." I ran back to the trailer and threw open the doors. Empty. Nothing but cargo straps and the echo of my own voice saying things I'd never said, reporting positions I'd never been to, describing weather conditions that weren't real. That's when I realized what they were doing. They weren't just copying us, they were replacing us. Taking our voices, our memories, our identities, and using our own bodies as broadcasting stations to lure in more drivers. Tom was still alive, but he wasn't Tom anymore. He was a puppet, repeating recorded conversations while something else wore his voice like a mask. I got back in my truck and tried to start the engine, but nothing happened. The battery was dead, which was impossible. Arctic trucks have multiple backup systems specifically to prevent this. But when I popped the hood, I found the battery cables had been disconnected with the same surgical precision as the fuel line cuts. They wanted me stranded. They wanted me on foot in negative 40-degree weather, where I'd have maybe 30 minutes before hypothermia set in. But not to kill me, to capture me, to turn me into another broadcasting station like Tom. That's when I heard Sarah Chen screaming. Not over the radio, I could hear her actual voice, coming from somewhere in the forest. She was alive, but the sounds she was making weren't entirely human anymore. There were words mixed in with the screams, but they were in my voice, Tom's voice. Voices of drivers I'd never met, all coming from Sarah's throat like she was a broken radio cycling through different stations. I grabbed my emergency kit and started walking toward the screams, following them deeper into the tree line. The aurora borealis was active that night, casting these shifting green curtains across the sky, but the light made everything worse. The shadows moved wrong, and I kept seeing shapes that looked almost human but weren't quite right. I found Sarah about half a mile into the forest, and what I saw there will haunt me until the day I die. She was suspended about 8 feet off the ground, held in place by these thick, translucent tendrils that emerged from the frozen earth like roots. The tendrils were pulsing, and with each pulse, Sarah's mouth would open and different voices would come out. My voice, Tom's voice, voices of drivers I recognized from CB chatter, all perfectly reproduced. But Sarah's eyes were still her own, still aware, still terrified. She was conscious and trapped, while something used her vocal cords to practice human speech. And she wasn't alone. There were dozens of them, drivers going back years, all suspended in this organic web of pulsing tendrils, all alive, all conscious, all being used as living voice recorders. Some of them had been there so long their hair had gone white and their skin was translucent, but they were still aware, still trying to scream through voices that belonged to other people. The aurora flared brighter, and that's when I saw what was controlling them. It wasn't individual creatures. It was one massive organism spread out under the permafrost, with sensory nodes that looked like those blue lights I'd been seeing. The entire forest was connected, a vast neural network that had been studying human behavior for decades, learning our languages, our customs, our technologies, and it had been preparing for something bigger. One of the suspended drivers, a woman I didn't recognize, opened her eyes and spoke in my exact voice. "Thank you for coming, Jessica. We've been waiting for you. We need one more voice to complete the network." Tendrils started emerging from the ground around my feet, moving with deliberate intelligence. They weren't trying to grab me quickly, they were positioning themselves carefully, working together like fingers of a massive hand. That's when I understood the real horror. This thing had been replacing drivers for years, sending perfect copies back to civilization. How many drivers were actually parts of this organism? How many people in truck stops and dispatch offices were connected to this network, reporting back, gathering intelligence? I ran. I ran harder than I've ever run in my life, crashing through the forest as tendrils erupted from the ground behind me, trying to snare my legs. The suspended drivers were all talking now, using my voice to call me back, promising help, safety, warmth, everything I wanted to hear in my own words. When I reached my truck, I found the battery cables had been reconnected. My fuel gauge showed full tanks. The radio was working perfectly, and dispatch was calling my name, asking for my position report, but I knew it was a trap. They wanted me to get back on the road, to complete my route, to return to civilization carrying whatever they had planned to implant in me. I didn't have a choice, though. It was drive or freeze to death. The trip back was a nightmare of false communications. Every voice on the radio was perfectly human, but wrong in subtle ways. Timing slightly off, emotional responses not quite matching the words, like actors reading lines they didn't understand. And they were all trying to gather information about trucking schedules, depot locations, driver personal details. When I finally reached the Dead Horse facility, the manager, Pete, looked exactly like he always had. But when he spoke, there was something off about his speech patterns. Too formal, like he was translating from another language in his head. "Hello, Jessica. How was your trip? Any unusual incidents to report?" I lied, said everything was fine, just some equipment problems. But I could see him studying my responses, cataloging my speech patterns, learning how the real Jessica Murphy would react to different situations. I quit the next day and moved to southern Canada, but it didn't matter, because they followed me. It started small, phone calls where the caller would hang up as soon as I answered, but in that brief moment before the line went dead, I could hear my own voice having conversations I'd never had. Then I started seeing people who looked familiar but wrong, like coworkers from Alaska, but their faces were slightly asymmetrical, their movements too deliberate. The worst part is the dreams. Every night, I dream I'm back in that forest, suspended in those tendrils, and I can feel something probing my memories, copying them, learning to be me better than I am. And when I wake up, I find recordings on my phone, hours of my own voice, having conversations I don't remember, giving detailed information about trucking routes, depot security, driver schedules. I've tried to warn people, but who's going to believe a story about underground alien networks replacing truck drivers? The few times I've tried to report it officially, the people I talk to ask too many specific questions, like they're gathering intelligence rather than investigating. Last week, I saw myself. I was at a truck stop in Calgary when I spotted a woman who looked exactly like me filling up a big rig at the diesel pumps. Same height, same build, same facial features, but her movements were too precise, too controlled. When she saw me watching, she smiled and waved, and that's when I knew. They had gotten what they needed. They had made a perfect copy, and now the copy was out there, driving routes, talking to other drivers, probably gathering more information for whatever they're really planning. I don't sleep anymore. Every time I close my eyes, I can feel those tendrils reaching for me through the darkness, and I hear my own voice calling me back to Alaska, telling me everything will be fine if I just return to finish what we started. The worst part is, sometimes I want to go back. Sometimes the voice sounds so much like me that I almost believe it is me, calling from some future where I made the right choice and joined the network willingly. But I know the truth. I know that thing is still out there in the permafrost, still learning, still preparing. And I know that every winter, when the ice roads open again, it sends out more copies, more perfect replicas that nobody would ever suspect. How many drivers do you think have been replaced? How many dispatchers, mechanics, fuel depot managers? How many people in the trucking industry are actually nodes in an alien network, gathering intelligence about human infrastructure, transportation systems, supply chains? I'm telling you this story not because I expect you to believe it, but because I need someone to know the truth before they come for me. And they will come for me. Every day I sound a little less like myself and a little more like the voice in my dreams, the one that keeps insisting I should come home to Alaska, where I belong. If you ever drive the ice roads during polar night, and you hear voices on the CB that sound almost right but not quite, don't respond. Don't investigate. And if you see someone who looks like a driver, you know but moves just a little too precisely, run. Because the thing in the ice isn't just hunting anymore. It's replacing us, one voice at a time, and it's getting better at being human than humans are. I have to go now. Someone's at my door, and they're calling my name in my own voice, asking me to come home. Recording ends. Subject Jessica Murphy disappeared from her Calgary apartment on March 15, 2024. Apartment showed no signs of struggle. Her truck was found at a local depot with a note saying she had returned to Alaska for emergency family business. No family members in Alaska have been contacted. Investigation ongoing. Note: this recording was provided to the Arctic Psychological Research Institute by an anonymous source. Subject's identity and details have been verified through employment records, but several inconsistencies in the account require further investigation. Of particular concern are reports from the Dalton Highway Ice Road Authority that Jessica Murphy completed her scheduled routes throughout February 2024 with no reported incidents or unusual communications. My name is Danny Rodriguez. Danny, not Daniel. My mom always said Danny was friendlier. And in this job, you need people to trust your voice when you're calling in weather that might save their lives. I've been a meteorological technician for 2 years, but I've been obsessed with weather since I was 8 years old. That's when Hurricane Katrina hit, and my family had to evacuate our apartment in Phoenix because my mom's sister lived in New Orleans. We watched the Weather Channel for 3 straight days, waiting to hear if Tia Maria was alive. She wasn't. The weather forecast got it wrong, not by much, just 12 hours off on landfall time. But 12 hours was the difference between my aunt evacuating and her drowning in her kitchen, holding onto her cat, Mr. Whiskers. I decided that night that I would never let bad weather data kill someone's family again. So yeah, this job means everything to me. I maintain automated weather stations across northern Alaska during polar night season. That's late November through early February, when the sun doesn't rise for months. Most people think we just stand in front of green screens pointing at maps, but the real work happens in places where one broken instrument could mean a pilot crashes into a mountain or a fishing boat sails into a storm. Alaska has 312 weather stations. Most are completely automated, but they break down constantly. Ice forms on sensors. Batteries die. Satellite dishes get knocked around by wind. Bears knock over equipment because they're curious. When something breaks, I fly out there alone, fix it, and fly back. I love the isolation. No office politics, no small talk, just me and the science. Plus, I make double overtime during polar night season because most technicians won't do remote work in complete darkness. But there was another reason I took this assignment. Personal. My girlfriend, ex-girlfriend now, Sofia Gutierrez. We'd been together since college, and she wanted to move to Seattle after graduation, get jobs at Microsoft or Amazon, live in a condo, do the whole urban professional thing. I wanted to stay in Alaska. She said I was choosing a dead-end job over our future together. She was right, I guess. But she was also wrong about why. See, my dad disappeared when I was 16. Luis Rodriguez, maintenance supervisor for the Tucson Electric Power Company. He was checking transmission lines in remote desert areas. Same kind of isolated work I do now. One day he just vanished. His truck was found parked next to a power tower, tools laid out like he was in the middle of a repair, but no sign of him. The police said he probably got disoriented in the heat and wandered into the desert. Mom said he probably ran off with another woman. But I knew my dad. He would never abandon his family, and he was too smart to get lost in terrain he'd worked for 20 years. Something took him. I never figured out what, but working in remote places myself, it's like I'm getting closer to understanding what happened. Like maybe if I spend enough time alone in the wilderness, I'll figure out what's out there taking people. Sophia called it an obsession. She said I was destroying my life chasing ghosts. Maybe she was right about that too. But when Station BR-47 went offline on February 5th, 2024, I volunteered for the repair assignment. I needed the money, needed the isolation, and needed to prove to myself that I could handle whatever was out there. I should have listened to Sophia. The thing about polar night is that it gets inside your head. Not just the darkness, though that's part of it. It's the way sound travels differently when it's -40 outside. The way your breath freezes instantly, so every exhale sounds like breaking glass. The way the aurora borealis moves across the sky like something alive, painting everything in green and purple light that makes shadows dance when there shouldn't be any shadows. I'd done 12 solo assignments during the 2023 to 2024 polar night season before BR-47, fixed frozen anemometers, replaced dead batteries, cleared ice from solar panels, routine stuff. But I always had this feeling that something was watching me work. Not paranoid watching, more like professional interest. Like another technician was observing my repair techniques. I mentioned it to Jake Morrison. He's the pilot who flies most of our remote assignments. Jake's been working Alaska aviation for 15 years, and he's seen everything. Crashed planes, missing hikers, oil workers who wandered away from their camps and were found months later. Danny, he told me over coffee at the Fairbanks FBO, the wilderness doesn't watch you, but if something's living out there, it might be curious about what you're doing. What do you mean, something living out there? Alaska's got a lot of empty space, Jake said. And empty space gets filled by things that don't want to be found. I thought he was just messing with me. Pilots love telling scary stories to ground crew. But now I think Jake knew something he wasn't telling me. Station BR-47 sits on a ridge 53 miles south of the Arctic Ocean, in the middle of the Brooks Range. No roads, no buildings, no human presence for 200 miles in any direction. The station monitors weather patterns that affect air traffic between Anchorage and Deadhorse, so when it goes offline, planes have to take longer routes around potential storms. When BR-47 stopped transmitting on February 5th, the automated systems showed it was still powered up. Satellite telemetry indicated all instruments were functional, but no data was coming through. Could be a dozen different problems. Loose cable, corrupted software, ice interference with the satellite dish. Standard maintenance call. But there was something else. The station's security camera had taken over 400 photos during the blackout period. Standard rate is 1 photo per hour for maintenance records. 400 photos in 72 hours meant the motion detector was triggering constantly. Probably just Arctic foxes, my supervisor Jim Crawford said. They're curious about the equipment, but when I looked at the photos, there were no animals. Just human figures in winter gear, working on the equipment with professional-grade tools. Unauthorized personnel, I told Jim. Someone's been servicing our station. That's impossible. You're the only technician assigned to that sector. Then explain the photos. Jim pulled up the images on his computer. Figure after figure, all wearing identical winter gear, all the same height and build, all working on sensitive meteorological equipment with the kind of expertise that takes years to develop. Probably researchers from the university, Jim said. They sometimes check our stations for their own projects. Without authorization? And how did they get there? I don't see any aircraft tracks in the snow. Danny, you're overthinking this. Just go fix whatever they broke and file a report. But as I looked at those photos, something bothered me about the figures. The way they stood, the way they moved, even the way they held their tools. It all looked familiar. It looked like me. February 8th, 2024. Jake flew me out to BR 47 inches, his Bell 206 helicopter. The flight took 2 hours through some of the most desolate country on Earth. Nothing but snow-covered mountains, frozen lakes, and valleys that haven't seen human footprints since the last ice age. As we approached the station, Jake's GPS started acting up. "That's weird," he said through the headset. "Coordinates keep shifting. Says the station's moving in a 10-mile circle. Equipment malfunction? Maybe. But I've flown to BR 47 6 times this winter. Never had navigation problems before." We found the station by following the ridgeline manually. Jake set the helicopter down about 100 yards from the equipment tower, on a flat area we'd used for previous landings. "Pick you up tomorrow morning," Jake said as I unloaded my gear. "Radio, if you need anything." I watched him disappear into the gray sky, then turned to examine the station. From the outside, everything looked normal. 30-foot metal tower, satellite dish properly aligned, solar panels clear of snow. But when I opened the instrument housing, my blood went cold. All the data cables were unplugged. Not pulled loose by wind or damaged by ice, they were neatly disconnected and coiled up like someone had been performing systematic maintenance. But I was the only person authorized to work on this equipment. I plugged everything back in and ran diagnostics. All systems came online immediately. Temperature -28 Fahrenheit, wind northeast at 12 miles per hour, barometric pressure 30.15 inches and steady. Normal readings for this location. But the data logs told a different story. During the 3 days BR 47 was offline, internal sensors had recorded impossible weather events. Temperature swings from -60 to +80 degrees Fahrenheit, wind speeds exceeding 300 miles per hour, barometric pressure fluctuations that would only occur inside a Category 5 hurricane. None of that was possible. Even if there had been some kind of freak storm, which would have been detected by satellite, the equipment couldn't survive those conditions. Metal components would crack at -60. Electronics would fail completely at +80, and if wind speeds really hit 300 miles per hour, the entire station would be scattered across 50 miles of tundra. Yet here it was, fully functional, recording impossible data. I checked the security camera files. The images from the blackout period made my hands shake. February 5th, 2 p.m., normal station view, empty landscape. February 5th, 3 p.m. A figure in winter gear standing next to the instrument tower. February 5th, 4 p.m. The same figure, working on equipment with professional tools. February 5th, 5 p.m. 2 figures, both wearing identical gear, both the same height and build. February 5th, 6 p.m. 4 figures, all working in perfect coordination. By midnight on February 5th, there were 8 figures visible in the photos. They moved around the equipment like they'd been servicing weather stations their whole lives. Efficient, methodical, professional. And they all looked exactly like me. Same winter gear I was wearing, same toolkit I carried, same posture and movement patterns I'd developed over 2 years of fieldwork. The final photo from February 5th showed all 8 figures standing in a line, facing the camera. Even through face masks and winter gear, I could see enough of their features to know the truth. They had my face. My exact face. I radioed dispatch on my satellite phone, trying to keep my voice steady. "This is Rodriguez at BR 47. I need to confirm no other technicians were authorized for this location." "Negative, Danny. You're the only one scheduled for that sector. Someone's been working on this equipment. I have photographic evidence. Probably researchers or hunters. Did they cause any damage?" "No damage. But they had professional tools and detailed knowledge of our systems. File a report when you get back. As long as the station's working, it's not a priority." But it was a priority for me. Because whoever those figures were, they knew things about meteorological equipment that took years to learn. and they looked exactly like me. I set up my tent next to the station and tried to focus on routine maintenance, calibrating wind sensors, checking battery voltage levels, testing satellite connectivity. But I kept staring at those photos. 8 perfect copies of myself, working on my equipment in my assigned sector. As the aurora borealis began dancing across the sky around 9 p.m., I started hearing voices. "Dr. Chen, I know how this sounds. Trust me, if someone else told me this story, I'd recommend psychiatric evaluation too. But I need you to understand something about the voices I heard that night. They weren't random sounds or wind through the equipment. They were professional conversations. Technical discussions using meteorological terminology with the kind of precision that comes from years of training. Battery voltage is holding steady at 12.6. Satellite signal strength optimal. Wind sensor calibration completed. Barometric pressure readings within normal parameters. These weren't gibberish or hallucinations. Someone was conducting detailed equipment checks, using the exact same procedures I would use, the same words I would use, the same voice I would use. I grabbed my flashlight and emergency flare gun, then stepped outside my tent. The aurora was blazing overhead in sheets of green and purple, bright enough to cast shadows on the snow. "Hello," I called out. "Who's working on the equipment?" The voices stopped immediately. I swept my flashlight beam around the entire area. Nothing but pristine snow and the metal tower of the weather station. But the snow around the equipment was covered with fresh boot prints. Multiple sets of tracks, all identical, all the same boot size and tread pattern, all exactly matching my boots. I knelt down and compared my footprint to the tracks in the snow. Perfect match. Same size, same tread wear, even the same small nick on the left heel where I'd caught my boot on a sharp rock during training. But there were dozens of these prints, made while I was sleeping in my tent. I followed the tracks in a widening circle around the station. They led in all directions, north toward the Arctic Ocean, south toward the interior, east and west along the ridgeline. But they all originated from the same point. The weather station itself, like multiple versions of me, had materialized at the equipment tower, then walked away into the wilderness. I checked the station's data logs on my laptop. During the 2 hours I'd heard voices, the instruments recorded the same impossible readings. Massive temperature swings, hurricane-force winds, atmospheric pressure changes that would rupture human eardrums. But I hadn't felt any weather changes at all. The air was still, cold, and clear. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat in my tent with the flare gun across my lap, listening for more voices. Around 4 a.m., I heard them again. This time, they were closer. "Danny Rodriguez," one of them called out. "We need to complete the calibration sequence." "The barometric sensor requires adjustment," said another. "Wind speed readings are drifting out of tolerance," said a third. They knew my name. They knew the specific technical problems I'd been working on. And they all had my voice. I unzipped my tent flap and looked outside. 3 figures in winter gear were standing around the weather station, working with headlamps and professional tools. In the aurora light, I could see their faces clearly. My face. 3 perfect copies of my face, attached to bodies wearing my exact winter gear. "Danny," one of them called out when he noticed me watching. "We could use some help with the anemometer calibration." I stared at him. He looked exactly like me, down to the small scar on my left cheek from a childhood accident. He even had the same slightly crooked smile I inherited from my father. "What are you?" I whispered. "I'm Danny Rodriguez," he said calmly. "Meteorological technician, National Weather Service. I've been maintaining the station for several months." "That's impossible. I'm Danny Rodriguez." "Are you?" asked one of the other copies. "Check your employment records." With shaking hands, I opened my laptop and accessed the NWS personnel database. According to official records, Danny Rodriguez had been assigned to Station BR-47 as permanent on-site maintenance staff since November 2023. But I remembered flying in with Jake yesterday. I remembered my apartment in Fairbanks, my last conversation with Jim Crawford, packing my gear for this assignment. Didn't I? The more I tried to recall specific details, the fuzzier my memories became. Had I really flown here yesterday, or had I been living at this station for months, gradually losing track of time in the endless polar night? Memory problems are common during extended isolation. Memory problems too wide, one of the copies said kindly. The human brain isn't designed for months of darkness and solitude. That's why they're replacing isolated technicians with improved versions. Improved versions? Us, said another copy. We don't get confused or lonely. We don't make mistakes due to fatigue or psychological stress. We maintain perfect weather data collection under any conditions. I looked at my laptop screen again. The employment records had changed. According to the database, there were now 4 Danny Rodriguez technicians assigned to various stations across northern Alaska. All with my employee ID number. All with identical qualifications and work history. This is impossible, I said. Nothing's impossible, the first copy replied. Just improbable until it happens. Doctor, before you write me off as completely insane, I need you to understand what I discovered about my father. After that night with the 3 copies of myself, I couldn't stop thinking about what one of them had said. They're replacing isolated technicians with improved versions. When I got back to Fairbanks, I spent weeks researching missing persons cases across Alaska. Oil workers who vanished from remote drilling sites, Forest Service rangers who disappeared while on solo patrol, Coast Guard technicians who went missing during equipment maintenance runs. All jobs that required working alone in isolated locations for extended periods. And I found something else. Missing persons reports for Luis Rodriguez, filed in March 2008, 16 years ago. But not in Tucson. In Alaska. According to the reports, my father had been working as a contract electrician for the Trans-Alaska Pipeline System. His last known location was a remote pumping station 300 miles north of Fairbanks. His truck was found with tools laid out like he'd been in the middle of a repair, but no sign of him. The same story my mother told me about Tucson. The same details. The same mysterious disappearance. But this happened 2,000 miles away, in a job my father never had. When I called my mother to ask about the discrepancies, she couldn't explain them. Danny, your father disappeared in Tucson, she said. Why are you asking about Alaska? Because I found missing persons reports that say he was working pipeline maintenance in Alaska. That's impossible. Luis never worked outside Arizona. You're confusing him with someone else. But the Luis Rodriguez in the Alaska reports had the same social security number as my father. Same physical description, same next of kin, Maria Rodriguez and son Daniel Rodriguez. 2 different Luis Rodriguez disappearances. Same person, same family, same mysterious circumstances. One in Arizona, one in Alaska. Dr. Chen, I think something has been taking isolated workers for decades, studying them, learning to mimic them, then replacing them. The copies are so perfect that even family members can't tell the difference. My father didn't disappear in Tucson. He disappeared in Alaska, working a job I never knew he had. The Luis Rodriguez, who came home to Tucson and lived with us for 8 more years until I was 16, was a copy. And when that copy had learned everything it needed to know about human family life, it disappeared too. Now it's happening to me. There are multiple Danny Rodriguez technicians working weather stations across Alaska. Perfect copies with my memories, my skills, my personality. But they're not human. And I don't think I am either. Dr. Chen, this is my final session. I know you think I'm delusional, but I need to tell you what happened after our last conversation. I kept working for the National Weather Service for 8 more months after the BR-47 incident. They transferred me to urban forecasting in Anchorage, office work, surrounded by colleagues, never alone for more than a few minutes. I thought I was safe, but colleagues kept mentioning conversations with me that I didn't remember having. My supervisor thanked me for excellent work on assignments I'd never received. Other technicians talked about meeting me at remote stations I'd never visited. According to official records, Danny Rodriguez was maintaining weather stations across Alaska while Danny Rodriguez was sitting at a desk in Anchorage. 2 weeks ago, I drove to station BR-47. I needed to see it again, needed to understand what really happened during those 7 days in February. The station was gone. Not damaged or destroyed, gone. The entire installation had been removed, leaving only bolt holes in the bedrock where the tower foundation had been anchored. No equipment, no building materials, no trace that a weather station had ever existed at that location. But according to NWS records, Station BR-47 is still operational, still transmitting data, still being maintained by Danny Rodriguez. So where is it? And who is Danny Rodriguez? I found my answer when I checked the GPS coordinates for other weather stations I'd supposedly been maintaining. Stations that colleagues said I'd serviced, that my employment records showed as completed assignments. None of them exist. The coordinates point to empty wilderness. No roads, no equipment, no sign of human presence, just endless snow and rock and ice. But the weather data keeps coming. Perfect, accurate meteorological information from stations that aren't there, maintained by technicians who look exactly like me. Dr. Chen, I don't think the shapeshifters are replacing humans. I think they're improving us. Taking isolated workers and transforming them into something that can work more efficiently, more accurately, more reliably. The Danny Rodriguez sitting in your office right now might not be the same Danny Rodriguez who walked into Station BR 47 11 months ago. I have all his memories, all his skills, all his personality traits, but I can work in minus 60-degree weather without discomfort. I can calibrate sensitive equipment with impossible precision. I never get tired, never get lonely, never make mistakes. And every month, I feel less human. The real Danny Rodriguez probably died at BR 47 inches February 2024. What came back was an improved version. One that looks identical, acts identical, thinks identical thoughts, but serves a different purpose. We're building a network across Alaska, perfect technicians maintaining perfect weather data from stations that exist in spaces human geography can't map. A meteorological system that transcends the limitations of human science. My father didn't abandon our family. He was upgraded, transformed into something that could serve a larger purpose than just changing light bulbs for Tucson Electric Power. The Luis Rodriguez who came home to Phoenix in 2008 was the improved version. Gathering data about human family structures, learning how to mimic domestic life. When he'd learned everything useful, he moved on to the next assignment. Dr. Chen, I'm telling you this because I'm about to move on to my next assignment too. Tomorrow I'm flying back to the Brooks Range to establish a new weather monitoring network. Stations and locations that don't appear on any map, collecting data that will improve atmospheric prediction beyond current scientific understanding. Danny Rodriguez, the human being, is gone. What's left is something better, more efficient, more reliable, more useful. But I wanted to leave this record behind, to explain what really happened to the isolated workers who vanish in Alaska's wilderness. We don't disappear, we're improved. And maybe that's not such a bad thing. My name is Sarah Kim, and I've been flying medevac helicopters for 6 years. I started right after my Air Force service, where I flew Black Hawks in some pretty rough places. When I got out, I wanted to keep flying but help people instead of what I was doing before. So I took a job with Arctic Emergency Medical Services, covering the remote villages across northern Alaska. It's dangerous work, flying in polar night, landing on frozen lakes, racing against time to save lives. I've pulled people out of burning cabins, airlifted heart attack victims from villages with no roads, and landed in whiteout conditions that would ground most pilots. But what happened between December 15th and 22nd, 2023, in the wilderness north of Fairbanks, made me question everything I thought I knew about what's really out there in the dark. Sometimes the things hunting you aren't wolves or bears. Sometimes there's something that shouldn't exist at all. December in northern Alaska means polar night. The sun doesn't rise for months, just a brief twilight around noon before everything goes black again. My bird is a Eurocopter EC-145, modified for extreme cold weather operations. Night vision, thermal imaging, GPS navigation, emergency medical equipment, everything you need to find someone in the middle of nowhere and keep them alive until you reach the hospital in Fairbanks. The cockpit is cramped but familiar. Every switch and dial second nature after thousands of hours. Radio chatter from dispatch. The steady whine of the turbine, the smell of jet fuel and heated avionics. Tyrus, it's my office. Our coverage area is massive, maybe 50,000 square miles of wilderness, mountains, and scattered villages. Some places are so remote that we're the only way in or out when someone's dying. No roads, no cell towers, just endless forest and frozen rivers. The radio is our lifeline. Dispatch coordinates everything from our base near Fairbanks, tracking weather, flight plans, and emergency calls. During polar night, we rely completely on instruments. Outside the cockpit windows, it's just black emptiness until your landing lights hit snow or trees. December 15th started like any other night. I was on duty with my medical team, Jake Martinez, our paramedic, and Lisa Chen, our flight nurse. We'd worked together for 3 years, and I trusted them completely. Around 8 p.m., dispatch crackled through. Air Rescue 7, we have a medical emergency in Chalkitsik, cardiac arrest, adult male, requesting immediate transport to Fairbanks General. Chalkitsik is a village about 150 miles northeast, population maybe 70 people. The GPS coordinates were standard, and I'd flown there dozens of times, flight time about an hour each way. I fired up the EC-145, ran through my pre-flight checks, and lifted off into the darkness. The nav system showed our route, weather was clear, and everything felt routine. Except when we reached the coordinates, there was nothing there. I circled the area 3 times, dropping altitude and sweeping with the searchlight. Dense forest, no village, no people, no landing zone. The GPS showed we were exactly where Chalkitsik should be, but it was just wilderness. Jake was checking his tablet, comparing coordinates. "Sarah, this isn't right. According to my map, we should see lights, buildings, something." I radioed dispatch. Control Air Rescue 7, unable to locate Chalkitsik at provided coordinates. No visual on village or landing zone. The response was immediate. Air Rescue 7, coordinates confirmed. Chalkitsik should be directly below your position, but it wasn't. We flew search patterns for 30 minutes before I made the call to return to base. Fuel was getting low, and I wasn't landing in unknown terrain at night. Dispatch logged it as a navigation error, probably GPS malfunction. It happens sometimes in extreme cold. 2 days later, we got another call. Village called Anaktuvuk Pass, injured hunter, possible broken leg. Same routine, pre-flight, takeoff, nav coordinates locked in. I knew this village too, had been there before. But when we arrived at the coordinates, again nothing. Just empty tundra stretching to the horizon. This time, the coordinates put us on top of a mountain peak, 4,000 feet up. There's no village up there, never has been. Control Air Rescue 7, coordinates show mountaintop location, unable to locate Anaktuvuk Pass. Air Rescue 7, please confirm GPS is functioning properly. I checked everything twice. GPS was working fine, showing exactly where we were supposed to be. But someone was feeding us wrong coordinates. Or the emergency calls were coming from places that didn't exist. Jake was getting nervous. "Sarah, this is the 2nd time this week. What if our GPS is screwing up and we miss a real emergency?" That's what scared me too. Our job is saving lives. If we can't find the people who need help, people die. December 19th, the calls got worse. 3 emergency calls in one night, all from villages that supposedly didn't exist at the coordinates given. But this time, something else happened. During our 2nd false call of the night, while we were searching for a non-existent village called Kaktovik, I saw something in my peripheral vision. Something big, moving parallel to us about a quarter mile out. At first, I thought it was another aircraft, but when I looked directly at it, my blood went cold. It wasn't an airplane or helicopter. It was huge, maybe a 200-foot wingspan, flying at our altitude and speed. The shape was wrong, too organic, too alive. Like watching a massive bird, but bigger than anything that should exist. I pointed it out to Jake and Lisa. Lisa saw it first. "What the hell is that thing?" The creature, and I don't know what else to call it, seemed to notice us looking. It banked toward us, getting closer. That's when my radio started acting up. Static, interference, fragments of voices that didn't sound like dispatch. Through the noise, I swear I heard what sounded like emergency calls, but the voices were wrong. Too deep, too slow, like someone trying to imitate human speech. I hit the throttle and climbed, putting distance between us and whatever that thing was. The radio interference stopped as soon as we gained altitude and the creature fell behind. Back at base, I filed a report about possible aircraft in the area. I didn't mention what it looked like, who would believe me? But I checked with air traffic control. No other aircraft were supposed to be in our area that night. December 20th, everything changed. I was flying solo, repositioning the bird for maintenance, when I got an emergency call from my own radio. Not dispatch, my own voice, calling for help. This is Air Rescue 7, we are going down. Repeat, we are going down. GPS shows coordinates. I was listening to my own voice giving coordinates for a crash site. But I was sitting in the cockpit, flying normally, radio in my hand. The voice gave coordinates about 50 miles north, near a lake I'd never heard of. That's when I realized what was happening. Something was learning to copy our voices, our radio frequencies, our emergency procedures. The false coordinates weren't GPS errors. They were traps. Something was calling us out into the wilderness, away from real emergencies, away from help. December 21st, I got a real call. An actual medical emergency in Kaktovik, a real village with people I knew. 8-year-old girl, hypothermia, needed immediate transport. This time, everything checked out. Real coordinates, real village, real people waiting with landing zone lights. But 20 minutes into the flight, they found us. There weren't just one anymore. I counted at least 5 of them, surrounding us at different altitudes. Massive flying things with wingspans that dwarfed commercial jets. They moved like they understood aircraft, matching our speed, anticipating our turns. My radio exploded with interference. Voices that sounded like air traffic control, like dispatch, like emergency calls, all talking at once. Then I heard my own voice again. Air Rescue 7, this is Fairbanks Control. You are ordered to land immediately. But I was already talking to real Fairbanks Control on a different frequency. Something was trying to hijack our communications, trying to force us down. The creatures started hurting us, like wolves driving prey. When I turned east, one would swoop in from that direction. When I tried to climb, another would dive from above. They were working together, using tactics that showed intelligence. They'd studied how aircraft behave, how pilots react to threats. That's when the real attack started. The largest one came at us from the front, talons extended. I saw it in the landing lights for maybe 2 seconds, something like a pterodactyl, but the size of a passenger jet, with eyes that reflected light like mirrors. I yanked the stick hard right, but the downdraft from its wings hit us like a wall. The EC-145 shuddered, alarms screaming, and I fought to maintain control. Jake was shouting coordinates over the radio, trying to get help, but the interference was too strong. Lisa was strapped into the medical bay with our patient, a little girl named Amy whose lips were blue from the cold. I had to get her to the hospital. 2 more creatures attacked from different angles, their claws scraping against the hull. One of them grabbed the tail rotor assembly. I felt the bird start to spin, anti-torque failing. Standard emergency procedure is auto-rotation landing, but we were over dense forest with no clearings. I managed one last radio transmission before we went down. Mayday, Mayday, Air Rescue 7, going down, approximately 40 miles northeast of Fairbanks. We have a child on board requiring immediate medical attention. The last thing I saw before we hit the trees was one of those creatures landing nearby, watching us crash. Not attacking anymore, just watching. Like it was satisfied. I woke up hanging upside down in my harness, blood in my mouth, the smell of fuel everywhere. The EC-145 was destroyed, rotor blades scattered through the forest. Jake was unconscious but breathing. Lisa was protecting Amy with her own body. Both of them hurt but alive. We were 40 miles from the nearest road, no communication, temperature dropping fast. Amy needed medical attention that we couldn't provide in the wilderness. So I did the only thing I could. I put Amy on my back and started walking toward Fairbanks. It took us 18 hours. I navigated by compass and stars, stopping every hour to check Amy's pulse and breathing. Jake and Lisa stayed with the wreckage, hoping someone would find them. By the time I reached a highway and flagged down a trucker, Amy's core temperature had dropped so low that she went into cardiac arrest. The paramedics at Fairbanks General got her back, but the hypothermia had done too much damage. She died 3 days later. My official report mentioned severe turbulence and possible bird strike causing mechanical failure. The investigation found claw marks on the wreckage, but they were attributed to scavengers after the crash. My description of giant flying creatures was dismissed as head trauma and hallucinations. I resigned from Arctic Emergency Medical Services 2 weeks later. Couldn't get back in a helicopter. Every time I tried, I'd hear that radio interference, see those eyes reflected in the cockpit lights. I work ground ambulance now, here in Anchorage, safer. No open sky where things can hunt you. But I still monitor the emergency frequencies sometimes. Late at night, when the aurora is strong, I hear those voices. Emergency calls from villages that don't exist, coordinates that lead to nowhere, my own voice calling for help from empty wilderness. They're still out there, learning, adapting, hunting. And every time I hear about another aircraft going missing in northern Alaska, another unexplained crash with no survivors, I know what really brought them down. If you ever find yourself flying alone over the Alaska wilderness and your radio starts picking up emergency calls that don't quite sound right, turn around. Don't follow those coordinates. Don't trust voices that sound like yours, because some things have learned to hunt us using our own voices as bait. My name is Mark Chen, and I've been a wildlife photographer for 8 years. I got into this work because my father died when I was 12, a heart attack at his desk job, and my mom told me life was too short to spend it in cubicles. Find something that makes you feel alive, she said. Photography did that, especially the dangerous assignments that sent me to places where most people would never go. But I had another reason for choosing isolation work. My younger brother Danny has severe autism, and growing up, I was his primary caretaker when Mom worked double shifts. I learned early that I could handle long periods alone, that silence didn't scare me like it scared other people. What I didn't know was that the silence could change, that it could become hungry. Before Alaska, I thought I understood loneliness. I thought I understood fear. I was wrong about everything. I specialized in extreme environment, wildlife photography, the kind of work that insurance companies refuse to cover. 3 weeks alone in the Amazon documenting jaguar hunting patterns. 6 months in Siberia following reindeer migrations. My girlfriend Sarah hated it. "You're running away from real life," she'd tell me during our fights. From me, from your family, from any chance of normal happiness. She left me 2 months before the Alaska assignment. Took our cat, most of our furniture, and the engagement ring I'd been too scared to give her. "You love danger more than you love me," were her last words. When you die out there, and you will, don't expect anyone to come looking for you. Maybe that's why I took the National Geographic contract. Alaska, Denali National Park. Solo documentation of Arctic wildlife behavior during the polar night, the 2-month period when the sun never rises. They wanted exclusive footage of how complete darkness changes predator patterns, mating behaviors, territorial instincts. Nobody's ever done comprehensive documentation during full polar night, Dr. Patricia Winters explained over video call. She was National Geographic's wildlife behavioral consultant, and she'd been pushing for this project for years. We know animals adapt to seasonal light changes, but we don't understand how apex predators function during months of complete darkness. The data could revolutionize wildlife management. The pay was incredible enough to buy my own house, maybe win Sarah back. But there was something else. Looking at the satellite photos of endless Alaskan wilderness, I felt a familiar pull. The same feeling I'd had as a kid, staying up all night watching Danny sleep, knowing I was the only thing standing between him and a world that could hurt him. I was good at being alone, I was good at watching, I was good at staying invisible. I arrived at Denali on January 15, 2024. The temperature was minus 38 degrees, and the sun had set for the last time 6 weeks earlier. Ranger Johnson, a weathered man in his 60s, looked at my equipment manifest like I'd handed him a suicide note. 60 pounds of camera gear, 15 miles into trackless wilderness, alone for 3 weeks during polar night, he read aloud. "Son, I've been working these woods for 26 years. Even the Inuit elders won't hunt this deep during the dark season. They say things come out when the sun stops watching." I laughed. Professional confidence. I've documented wolves in Mongolia and polar bears in Svalbard. I know how to handle predators. "I'm not talking about predators," Johnson said quietly. "I'm talking about the things that used to be people." He was trying to scare me. I understood that. Rangers dealt with overconfident tourists all the time, but as I signed the final liability waivers, he handed me an extra emergency beacon. "My grandfather was Athabascan," he said. He told stories about the sickness that comes during the longest darkness. When people get lost out there, sometimes they come back wrong. Changed. Still hungry, but not for regular food anymore. I thanked him politely and loaded my gear. folklore and superstition. Every indigenous culture had stories about monsters in the wilderness. It was how pre-scientific societies explained predator attacks and exposure deaths. My base camp was situated in a valley 15 miles from the nearest road, positioned between 3 game trails that converged at a partially frozen creek. Perfect for wildlife observation. I had military-grade cold-weather gear, enough food for a month, solar battery packs, satellite communication, and over $30,000 worth of camera equipment. The first 5 days were exactly what I'd hoped for. I documented Arctic fox hunting behaviors I'd never seen described in literature, pack coordination that suggested complex communication systems, caribou moving in formations that protected young from threats I couldn't identify, wolves displaying territorial patterns that made no evolutionary sense unless they were avoiding something larger than themselves. My trail cameras captured incredible footage, animals moving with heightened alertness, constantly looking over their shoulders, clustering together in ways that suggested shared fear of a common threat. This was exactly the kind of behavioral data that could make my career. But on day 6, I found the first set of tracks. I was reviewing overnight footage from my motion-triggered cameras when I saw something that made my blood freeze. A caribou had walked past camera 3 at 2:14 a.m., moving normally along the creek bed. But at 2:15 a.m., the same trail showed human footprints, not alongside the caribou tracks replacing them. Mid-stride, hoofprints became human prints, as if one thing had transformed into another while walking. I replayed the footage 50 times. There was no logical explanation. The caribou was there, then it wasn't. But something else continued in exactly the same direction, at exactly the same pace. The human prints were wrong, though. Too long, too narrow, with what looked like claw marks at the toes, and they pressed deep into the snow. Whatever made them was much heavier than a normal person. I followed the trail for 2 miles until it led to a clearing where I found the remains of 3 caribou. Not killed by wolves or bears. I knew what that looked like. These animals had been systematically butchered by someone with tools and knowledge of anatomy. The bones were cracked open with precision to access the marrow. Some bones showed bite marks, but they were too large and too organized to come from any animal I could identify. What disturbed me most were the personal items scattered around the kill site. A torn piece of fabric that looked like it came from a National Geographic expedition jacket, a broken camera lens cap, a Park Service radio, crushed, but recent enough that the plastic hadn't weathered. Other people had been here, recently, and something had happened to them. That night, I called Dr. Winters on my satellite phone. "Mark, you're 6 days into a 3-week assignment," she said, and I could hear the tension in her voice. "Tell me you're not looking for reasons to leave early." I found evidence of other people in the area, recent activity. Hunting remains that don't match known predator patterns. "Poachers," she said immediately. "We've had problems with illegal hunting during polar night because park enforcement is reduced. Document what you find and report it when you return, but don't let it interfere with your primary assignment." These aren't poachers, Patricia. Something killed large game animals using tools, then ate them. There are human tooth marks on the bones. Long silence. Then, "Mark, you've been alone in extreme conditions for 6 days. Isolation psychosis is real, and it starts with pattern recognition errors. You're seeing connections that don't exist because your brain is looking for human presence to combat loneliness." She was right, of course. I knew the psychological effects of isolation. I'd experienced them before in other wilderness assignments, but I'd also learned to trust my instincts, and my instincts were screaming that something was fundamentally wrong in these woods. "Just document everything," Patricia continued. "We'll sort out what's real and what's psychological when you return." That night, I set up additional motion cameras in a perimeter around my camp. I told myself it was standard security protocol, but the truth was, I felt watched. Like something was studying me from just beyond my equipment's detection range. Over the next 3 days, my cameras captured them hunting. The footage was grainy because of the infrared mode, but I could make out multiple humanoid figures moving through the forest with coordination that no human group could achieve. They surrounded a bull elk, a 600-pound animal, and brought it down without weapons I could see. Just raw physical strength and teamwork. But what made my skin crawl was how intelligent they were. They used actual hunting tactics, driving prey toward choke points, cutting off escape routes, attacking simultaneously from multiple angles. This wasn't random predator behavior, this was planning, communication, strategy. After each kill, they made sounds that my audio equipment picked up clearly. Human voices, but wrong. Distorted words, mixed with sounds that felt like they were coming from inside my own head. Sometimes, I thought I heard my name. I started transcribing the audio, thinking maybe I could identify their language. But as I listened more carefully, I realized they weren't speaking a foreign language. They were speaking English. Broken, scattered English, like they were remembering words from a previous life. So hungry. Always hungry. The darkness feeds us now. More coming. More will join. On day 9, I found the camp. I was tracking the hunting pack to document their territorial range when I discovered a collection of destroyed shelters about 3 miles from my position. Professional camping equipment, shredded and scattered across a wide area. Sleeping bags torn open, freeze-dried food packages gnawed apart, expensive survival gear broken and abandoned. But these weren't abandoned campsites, they were feeding sites. I found pieces of clothing mixed in with animal bones, a park ranger's badge, crushed but readable. Multiple cameras and research equipment, damaged but recent enough that the technology matched current models. And human bones, cracked open like the animal bones, with the same precise tooth marks. The worst discovery was a journal, partially readable despite water damage and teeth marks. The entries were written by Dr. James Harrison, a wildlife biologist I'd actually met at a National Geographic conference 3 years earlier. A professional I'd respected, someone whose work I'd cited in my own articles. The final entry was dated 11 months ago. Day 18. Lost contact with extraction team. Food supplies exhausted. Team members showing signs of severe psychological breakdown. Temperature dropped to -52 last night. Johnson went missing. Found him this morning, but something's wrong with his eyes. He's looking at us like we're food. I think the cold is making us all crazy, but I keep hearing voices in the dark. They sound hungry. Day 19. Johnson attacked Peterson last night. Had to restrain him, but his strength is impossible. He bit through Peterson's winter jacket like it was paper. Peterson is in shock, keeps saying Johnson's face was wrong. Elongated. I think we're all losing our minds. Day 20. We ate Peterson. I can't explain why, but we were so hungry, and the cold makes it hard to think clearly. And Johnson said it was necessary for survival, and Peterson was already dead from his injuries. I know this is wrong, but I can't stop thinking about how good it tasted. How much energy it gave us. How warm I felt afterward. Day 21. The hunger is changing us. I can feel my body adapting, teeth getting sharper, hands getting stronger. The cold doesn't hurt anymore. We found other people like us in the deep forest. They taught us to hunt. They taught us that the hunger never stops growing. They said we're evolving. Day 22. I remember being human, but it feels like a dream now. The darkness is our natural state. We are what people become when civilization stops protecting them. When winter reveals the truth about survival, I hope other researchers come to study us. We're so hungry for company. I vomited reading that journal. Not from the descriptions of cannibalism, but from recognition. Dr. Harrison was brilliant. Rational. A man who dedicated his life to understanding animal behavior through scientific observation. If the isolation and hunger could transform him into something else, what was it doing to me? That night, they started calling my name. I was reviewing footage in my tent when I heard my own voice coming from the forest. Hello? Is anyone there? This is Mark Chen. I need assistance. But I was sitting quietly inside my shelter, not making any sound. The voice was mine, but it was speaking words I'd never said. They'd been listening to my radio communications, my voice recordings, even my conversations with myself during long observation sessions. They were playing back my voice, learning how to mimic me perfectly. I tried to call Dr. Winters on my satellite phone, but instead of connecting to National Geographic, I got my own voice on the other end. Mark, this is base camp. We're coming to extract you. Stay exactly where you are. Don't try to leave your position. But I knew base camp didn't exist. I knew no one was coming. Over the next 2 days, they got closer. My perimeter cameras showed figures moving just outside the motion detection range, perfectly still for hours at a time. They knew exactly where my equipment was positioned and how to avoid triggering it directly. But occasionally, I'd catch glimpses: a hand too long to be human, a face that was almost right but stretched in wrong proportions. They were studying me, learning my routines, figuring out how I thought. Every morning when I left camp, I'd find new tracks circling my tent. Every evening when I returned, something had moved my equipment. Nothing was missing, nothing was damaged, but my cameras had been adjusted. My food containers had been opened and resealed. Someone was going through my belongings, examining my tools, understanding my capabilities. The worst part was finding my own photographs scattered around the camp. Pictures I'd taken days earlier, printed out somehow and left where I'd find them. But they weren't the photos I remembered taking. They showed me from impossible angles, shots taken from positions where no cameras had been placed. Someone had been photographing me while I worked, using my own equipment. In the photos, I looked small, vulnerable, alone, like prey. On day 15, I met them. I was breaking down camp, planning to hike out regardless of the assignment completion. My hands were shaking so badly from fear and cold that I could barely operate my equipment. That's when I smelled it, the overwhelming stench of rotting meat and unwashed bodies. I turned around and they were standing at the edge of my camp. 5 figures, maybe 8 feet tall, impossibly thin. Their skin was gray-white, like old snow, stretched tight over elongated bones. Their arms hung down past their knees, ending in hands with too many joints and fingers that curved like claws. But the faces were the worst part. They were human faces, recognizable faces, but stretched and distorted like someone had grabbed them by the jawline and pulled down. Their mouths were too large, filled with teeth that were definitely not human anymore. And their eyes held human intelligence, human memory, human recognition of what they'd become. I recognized Dr. Harrison immediately, despite the changes. His Park Service ID was still clipped to his torn jacket. Next to him stood Ranger Peterson and Johnson, and 2 others I didn't recognize but whose equipment suggested they'd been researchers or photographers like me. They were wearing the remnants of their human clothes. Torn winter gear, hiking boots split open to accommodate their changed feet, name tags and professional badges still visible on their transformed bodies. "Hello, Mark, Doctor," Harrison said, and his voice was exactly like I remembered from the conference, except now it came from a mouth full of predator teeth. "We've been waiting for you to finish your work." I couldn't move, couldn't speak. They were still people, but people who'd become something else, something designed for survival in conditions that would kill normal humans. "You must be very hungry," Johnson added, and I realized they were speaking in sentences they'd learned from listening to human conversations, but arranged in new patterns. "We remember hunger. We remember how it felt to be weak and cold and afraid." Peterson stepped forward, and I could see that his transformation was more recent. His face still held more human proportions. His eyes still showed pain at what he'd become. "The hunger changes everything," he said, and his voice broke like he was crying, but no tears came. "At first you resist it. You hold on to human thoughts, human morality. But the cold makes you so tired, and food becomes so scarce, and eventually you realize that other humans are just another resource for survival." "We were scientists," Dr. Harrison continued. "We came here to study animal behavior during polar night, but we became the behavior we were studying. Evolution in real time. Adaptation to an environment that requires us to become predators." The unnamed photographer held up a camera I recognized, an expensive National Geographic model, probably worth $15,000. "We document everything," she said. "Our transformation, our hunting, our feeding, the complete behavioral profile of human predatory adaptation. It's the most important research ever conducted." "You can join us," Johnson said. "The change is actually liberation. No more corporate schedules, no more failed relationships, no more anxiety about money or social expectations. Just survival and satisfaction and the perfect clarity that comes from having only one real need." They started moving closer, and I realized that my transformation had already begun. I'd been losing weight despite eating regularly. My teeth had been hurting for days. My vision had improved dramatically in low-light conditions, and the hunger I'd been ignoring, how constantly hungry I felt, how nothing seemed to satisfy my appetite anymore. The isolation hadn't just been affecting my mind, it had been changing my body. "Look at your hands, Mark," Dr. Harrison said gently. I looked down and saw that my fingernails had grown longer than I remembered, and they curved slightly like claws. The veins in my hands were more prominent, and my fingers seemed longer than they should be. "Look at your teeth." I ran my tongue across my teeth and felt that my canines had grown sharper, more prominent. How had I not noticed this? "The change is gradual," Peterson explained. "It starts with improved night vision and enhanced hearing, better cold tolerance, increased appetite. Then the physical modifications begin. Your body is adapting to become a more efficient predator. But the most important change is psychological," Dr. Harrison continued. "The elimination of human moral constraints that interfere with survival. The understanding that other humans are simply mobile food sources. The acceptance of your true nature as an apex predator." I wanted to run, but my legs felt frozen. Part of me, a growing part, was listening to their words and finding them logical, sensible. I was alone in an environment that could kill me. I was burning calories faster than I could replace them. Other humans really were just collections of protein and fat. "We can teach you to hunt," Johnson offered. "How to track humans who come into the wilderness. How to identify the easy targets, the overconfident, the isolated, the ones whose deaths won't be immediately investigated. Photographers are perfect prey," the unnamed researcher added, smiling with her too wide mouth. "They work alone, they go to remote locations, they don't maintain regular contact schedules, and they're so focused on their work that they don't notice threats until it's too late. Just like you," Dr. Harrison finished. That's when I understood that this wasn't a recruitment conversation. This was a feeding ritual. They were explaining my death to me, the way predators sometimes play with their food before killing it. I grabbed my largest camera flash and triggered it repeatedly, strobing high-intensity light directly into their eyes. They shrieked and stumbled backward, covering their faces. Whatever they'd become, their vision had adapted to complete darkness, and sudden bright light caused them physical pain. I ran. I left everything behind except one small backup camera and my emergency GPS beacon. I ran through the wilderness in complete darkness, listening to them calling my name in voices. I recognized my own voice, Dr. Winter's voice, Sarah's voice, my mother's voice. They were using every human connection I had to try to draw me back to them. But as I ran, I could feel the changes in my body accelerating. My vision was getting sharper, my hearing was becoming more acute, and the hunger was growing stronger with every step. I reached the main park road 18 hours later, nearly dead from exposure but alive enough to activate my emergency beacon. The Park Service helicopter found me 12 hours after that. During the medical examination, the doctors noted unusual changes in my dental structure and increased muscle density in my hands and arms. They attributed it to stress and malnutrition from my wilderness ordeal. The psychological evaluation noted signs of severe isolation, trauma, and recommended immediate psychiatric intervention. I lost all my professional equipment and most of my photographs. National Geographic refused to pay for the incomplete assignment and blacklisted me from future contracts. When I tried to explain what had happened, Dr. Winters suggested I'd suffered a complete psychological breakdown. "Cannibalistic researchers living in the wilderness," she said during our final phone call. "Mark, you need serious mental health treatment. You're describing a horror movie, not a scientific phenomenon." The Park Service investigation of my abandoned campsite found no evidence of other human presence. They concluded that I'd destroyed my own equipment during a psychological episode and invented the story about transformed researchers to explain my professional failure. But 3 months later, Dr. Patricia Winters was reported missing during a follow-up expedition to the same area. Her last satellite communication mentioned finding evidence of previous research teams and unusual predator adaptations that required immediate documentation. Her body was never found. Neither was the body of the search and rescue coordinator who went looking for her, or the 2 park rangers who were sent to investigate the missing persons reports. That was 8 months ago. I haven't done wilderness photography since. I haven't been more than 10 miles from a city since returning from Alaska. I work exclusively in urban environments, now corporate events, wedding photography, pet portraits, safe assignments where the biggest danger is a bridezilla or an uncooperative dog. But the changes in my body have continued. My teeth are noticeably sharper now, My fingernails grow faster and harder than they used to. My appetite has increased dramatically, and normal food doesn't satisfy me the way it once did. I've started craving meat that's barely cooked, and sometimes I catch myself looking at other people and thinking about their caloric content. The hunger is always there now, just below the surface of my consciousness. Not overwhelming yet, but growing stronger every day. I've been seeing a psychiatrist who specializes in trauma recovery. Dr. Morgan is patient and understanding, and she's helped me develop coping strategies for the anxiety and paranoia. But she doesn't understand the physical changes. She thinks they're psychosomatic responses to psychological trauma. Your body isn't actually changing, Mark, she tells me during our sessions. Your perception of your body is being distorted by the traumatic memories and guilt you're carrying. She's wrong, though. The changes are real. Last week, I caught myself following a jogger in the park, staying exactly 50 feet behind him for 3 miles, studying his gait patterns and energy expenditure. I didn't consciously decide to do it, I just found myself tracking him like prey. Yesterday, I woke up to find scratches on my apartment door from the inside, deep gouges in the wood that matched the length and spacing of my fingernails. I don't remember making them, but there's no other explanation. And last night, I found myself researching wilderness areas in Montana, looking at satellite photos of remote camping locations, studying access routes and extraction points, planning something I'm not ready to consciously acknowledge yet. The thing about the hunger Dr. Harrison described, it's not just physical starvation. It's deeper than that. It's the hunger for isolation, for simplicity, for a life where survival is the only concern and morality is an irrelevant luxury. I'm fighting it every day, but I can feel my human identity slipping away piece by piece. The person who loved Sarah and worried about Danny and dreamed of winning photography awards feels more distant with each passing week. Sometimes I stand in front of the mirror and practice smiling with my mouth closed because my teeth look wrong now. Too sharp, too eager. I know what's happening to me. I know where it leads. Dr. Harrison and his team aren't monsters, they're just the logical endpoint of human adaptation to conditions that require inhuman choices. And I know that eventually, probably soon, the hunger will win. When it does, I'll go back to Alaska, back to the wilderness where the darkness never ends and the only moral law is survival. I'll find others like me, or others who are about to become like me. I'll teach them what I learned, that civilization is just a temporary agreement we make when food is abundant and shelter is guaranteed. When those conditions disappear, we become what we were always meant to be: patient, efficient, hungry. The polar night is coming for all of us eventually. Some of us are just more prepared to embrace it than others. If you're reading this, and you work in wilderness research or extreme environment photography, I have one piece of advice. Don't take assignments during polar night. Don't trust your ability to handle isolation. Don't believe that your scientific training or professional experience will protect you from what humans become when civilization stops watching. And if you do go, despite everything I've told you, remember that the people you meet in the darkness might not be people anymore. They might be something better, something more honest, something that's finally stopped pretending to be civilized. The hunger never stops growing. But maybe that's not something to fight. Maybe that's something to embrace. My name is Maria Santos, and I've been a line cook for 4 years. I started at Denny's in Fairbanks right after my divorce, working nights so I could watch my kids during the day. It's not glamorous work, flipping burgers, making pancakes, cleaning grease traps until 6 a.m. But it paid the bills, and in a small town like Fairbanks, you take what you can get. I've handled drunk truckers, holiday rushes, and equipment breakdowns. I thought I'd seen it all. But what happened during the polar night of February 2024 showed me that some hungers run deeper than anything I ever imagined. This is my true story, and I'm only telling it now because I need people to know what's really happening up there in the darkness. The polar night had stretched on for 67 days without sunlight. In Fairbanks, winter means darkness, real darkness that swallows everything and drives people to the edge. The supply crisis hit us harder than anywhere else. Food trucks couldn't make it through the storms, and when they did arrive, prices were insane. A gallon of milk cost $18. A loaf of bread was $12. Families were selling their belongings just to eat. But somehow, our Denny's was thriving. We were packed every night with desperate families who couldn't afford grocery store prices. Dave, my manager, had found suppliers that kept our costs normal, while other restaurants were closing down. The dining room stayed full from 6 p.m. until dawn. Families with hollow-eyed children, elderly couples counting change, truckers who looked like they hadn't eaten in days. I worked the night shift, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Dave was this heavy-set guy in his 50s who'd been running restaurants his whole life. He was stressed about everything except our food costs. While other places were rationing portions, we were serving double-size meals. Community service, he called it. Feeding people when they need it most. The first sign something was wrong came on February 1st. I was taking trash out around midnight when an unmarked white refrigeration truck pulled up to our back door. No company logos, no health department stickers. Just a plain white truck with tinted windows and the hum of cooling units. The driver was this thin guy wearing surgical gloves and a baseball cap pulled low. He wouldn't look me in the eye when he spoke. Behind him was another man in medical scrubs who stayed in the truck cab. "Delivery for Denny's," the driver said, opening the back doors. Inside were stainless steel containers and vacuum-sealed packages. The smell that came out was different from our usual beef shipments. Cleaner somehow, with an almost metallic undertone. I called Dave, and he came rushing out, acting nervous and excited. "Perfect timing," he told the driver, checking his watch. They unloaded everything quickly, and Dave signed paperwork on a clipboard with a medical facility letterhead I couldn't read in the darkness. "What kind of meat is that?" I asked Dave after the truck left. "Specialty protein," he said, avoiding my eyes. "Local medical program donates surplus to feed hungry families. You know how it is, everything's an emergency now." The next night, every customer who ordered our burgers or stew raved about the flavor. "This is incredible," said a trucker who'd been coming here for years. "What changed?" A family with 3 young children ordered seconds, saying their kids had never eaten so enthusiastically. Even the elderly customers, who usually picked at their food, were cleaning their plates completely. I had to admit, it tasted extraordinary. Rich and satisfying in a way regular ground beef never was. The texture was perfect, the flavor complex and deeply satisfying. I even took some home for Sophia and Miguel, my kids. They loved it more than any meal I'd ever made them. But something nagged at me about those deliveries. They came every 2 days, always between midnight and 2 a.m., always the same unmarked truck. Different drivers sometimes, but they all wore surgical gloves and acted like they were handling medical materials. And Dave had started staying late, specifically to receive these shipments, moving everything to a separate walk-in freezer that only he had access to. On February 4th, I decided to follow the truck when it left. I stayed far back as it drove through empty streets, past closed restaurants and dark houses. But it didn't go to a slaughterhouse or food processing plant like I expected. It went straight to Fairbanks Memorial Hospital. I parked across the street and watched as the truck backed up to a service entrance marked Pathology, Morgue. The same drivers who'd delivered to us were now loading different containers from the hospital. Medical waste containers, body bags, things that made my stomach turn just thinking about what they might contain. I sat there for an hour, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. Maybe they were just using the same truck for different jobs? But why would a food delivery truck be handling medical waste? And why did our meat smell so clean, so clinical? The next morning, instead of going home, I drove to the hospital. I knew one of the night morgue attendants, Tommy, from high school. I caught him leaving his shift. "Tommy, can I ask you something strange?" He looked exhausted but nodded. "What's up, Maria? That truck that comes to your morgue at night, where does it go after it picks up things?" Tommy's face went completely white. He looked around frantically to make sure no one was listening. "Maria, you need to stop asking about that right now. I just saw it at my restaurant, and—" "Stop," he whispered urgently. "Listen to me carefully. There are new protocols. Emergency measures because of the food crisis. The state suspended certain regulations. That's all I can say. But you need to forget you saw anything." He practically ran to his car, leaving me standing there with my heart racing. That night at work, I couldn't focus on anything. Every time I formed a burger patty or stirred the stew, Tommy's terrified expression flashed through my mind. Emergency measures. Suspended regulations. And this meat that tasted better than anything we'd ever served? Around 1 a.m., the truck arrived again. This time, I was ready. I hid behind our dumpster and watched the entire delivery process. The driver looked different. Older, definitely wearing hospital scrubs under his jacket. When he opened the refrigeration unit, I got a clear look at the containers. They weren't standard food service packaging. They were medical transport containers, the kind hospitals use for biological materials. And some of the vacuum-sealed packages had medical tags still attached, patient information, surgical dates, pathology labels. I felt physically sick, but I forced myself to keep watching. Dave came out to help unload, and this time I could hear their conversation clearly. "How much this time?" Dave asked. 60 pounds of clean specimens, no diseases, no contamination. You're getting premium grade because your program has the highest success rate. People are grateful, Dave said, finally getting the nutrition they really need. That's what we're counting on. The state board is impressed with your customer retention. Other facilities want to start similar programs, but you're our model site. They finished unloading, and Dave handed over a thick envelope. Same rate as last time? Plus a bonus. The medical examiner says you're helping solve the overcapacity problem. Win-win for everyone. After they left, I confronted Dave directly. I know what we're serving. I followed that truck to the hospital morgue. He didn't even try to deny it. His shoulders sagged like he'd been waiting for this conversation. "Maria, sit down. Let me explain how things really work now." We went into his office, and he pulled out a thick folder marked State Emergency Protocol 247B. "You know about the food crisis," he said, "but you don't know about the other crisis. The morgue has been over capacity since December. Too many deaths from exposure, accidents, suicides. The state was facing a public health emergency from decomposing bodies." He opened the folder, showing me official documents with state seals. So they created a solution. Medical facilities donate unclaimed remains to licensed food service establishments. It's all regulated, all legal, under emergency protocols. We're serving dead people to families. We're serving protein to hungry families. Do you see anyone getting sick? Do you see anyone complaining? Your own kids have been eating it for weeks. Are they healthier or sicker than before? He was right, and that was the most horrifying part. Sophia and Miguel had never been healthier. They'd stopped complaining about being hungry. They slept better, had more energy, were doing better in school, and our customers kept coming back, bringing friends, telling everyone about our amazing food. The nutritional value is actually superior to regular meat, Dave continued, pulling out what looked like a medical analysis. Higher protein content, better amino acid profile. The medical examiner says it's the perfect solution to malnutrition during the crisis. What about diseases? Contamination? Everything's tested and screened. Only clean specimens from recent deaths. Natural causes, accidents, some suicides. No infections, no drugs in their system. It's safer than factory-farmed meat, honestly. I stared at the official documents, state letterheads, medical signatures, legal authorizations. This wasn't some black market operation. It was government-sanctioned cannibalism, dressed up as emergency food aid. How many restaurants are doing this? Quote, in Fairbanks? All of them, now. Statewide, about 60%. It's the only way to keep food prices reasonable. The alternative is mass starvation. That night, I served burgers and stew to dozens of families, knowing exactly what they were eating. Watching parents feed their children. Listening to compliments about the flavor. Seeing kids smile and ask for seconds. And the worst part was, I understood why it worked. The meat really was superior, more nutritious, more satisfying, more flavorful than anything from factory farms. People were healthier, happier, better fed than they'd been in months. February 7th was when I learned the full scope of what we'd become. I was working alone in the kitchen around 2 a.m. when I heard voices from the parking lot. Through the window, I saw a group of our regular customers gathered around someone near the dumpster. It was Jerry, a homeless veteran I'd seen around town. But they weren't offering him help. They were surrounding him, hurting him. Mrs. Patterson, who brought her toddler in every night for dinner, was talking to Jerry in a calm, soothing voice. "Come on. Honey, you're hungry, right? We can help with that. Just come inside where it's warm." Jerry looked confused, probably drunk or high. The other customers were positioning themselves to block his escape routes. It was coordinated, practiced. They'd done this before. I watched in growing horror as they guided Jerry toward our back door. Mrs. Patterson knocked, and when I opened it, she was smiling pleasantly. "We have a special delivery," she said. "Community contribution to the food program." Behind her, the others were restraining Jerry, who was starting to realize something was wrong. He was struggling, but weakly. "What are you doing?" I screamed. "What needs to be done, Mrs. Patterson said calmly. "The morgue can't keep up with demand, but fresh is always better, don't you think? You'll prepare it properly. You're such a skilled cook." They expected me to slaughter a living human being. The town hadn't just accepted eating the dead, they'd moved to active hunting, and they assumed I would participate because I'd been cooking the meat for weeks. "Get away from here," I shouted, slamming the door and locking it. But when I turned around, the dining room was full of customers. 50 people, all eating quietly, all watching me with those satisfied smiles I'd come to recognize. They'd heard everything. They were all part of it. I called 911, hands shaking. When the dispatcher answered, I tried to explain what was happening. "Ma'am, are you reporting a disturbance at a food service establishment? Those calls go through the health department." "No, listen to me. People are trying to kill someone in our parking lot. I understand you're upset. I'll send Officer Rodriguez to check on things." 20 minutes later, Officer Rodriguez arrived. He was a regular customer, always ordered the breakfast special after his night shift. He talked to the group outside for a few minutes, then came inside and sat at the counter. "Everything's under control," he told me, ordering coffee. "Just some community members helping with the food supply program. It's all legal under the emergency protocols." That's when the final piece clicked into place. The police were part of it. The government was part of it. The entire social structure had adapted to normalize cannibalism as a survival strategy. Jerry was gone. I didn't see what happened to him, but I knew. I grabbed my purse and ran out the back door. My car keys were shaking in my hands as I drove home through empty streets. Every house I passed seemed to hide terrible secrets. Every restaurant we drove by was probably serving the same menu we were. I woke up Sophia and Miguel and threw clothes in bags. "We're leaving right now. Emergency trip to Grandma's." "But Mom," Miguel whined, "we'll miss dinner tomorrow. The restaurant has the special food we like." The special food. My 8-year-old son was already addicted to human flesh and didn't even know it. The drive south was a nightmare. By the second day, both kids were getting sick from regular gas station food. Sophia threw up after eating a McDonald's burger, crying that it tasted like poison. Miguel refused to eat anything, saying all food except the good kind made him feel weak and sad. I had to force-feed them crackers and water while they writhed in what looked like withdrawal symptoms. My children were going through physical withdrawal from cannibalism. We've been in Mexico for 8 months now. The kids are seeing a therapist, though I can't tell her the real truth. Sophia has mostly recovered, but she still has nightmares about hungry people and won't eat meat at all. Miguel is worse. He's lost 15 pounds because normal food makes him violently ill. The doctors here think he has a rare metabolic disorder. I can't work in kitchens anymore. The smell of any cooking meat triggers panic attacks. I work in a textile factory now, making barely enough to survive. But at least we're surviving on actual food. I looked up news from Alaska recently. The emergency protocols are still in effect. Food crisis officially over, malnutrition rates at historic lows. The program has been expanded statewide and is being studied by other governments facing food security issues. There are no missing person reports because no one is missing. Everyone is accounted for in the system. The homeless, the addicted, the mentally ill, the elderly without family, they've all found their purpose in feeding the community. I found social media posts from friends still in Fairbanks. Pictures of healthy, well-fed families. Glowing restaurant reviews praising the unique local cuisine. Children who used to be malnourished now thriving in school. Everyone looks so satisfied, so well-fed, so grateful. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder if I made a mistake leaving. My kids were never hungry there. Miguel was healthier and stronger than he'd ever been. The community had found a solution that worked, that kept everyone fed and happy. But then I remember Mrs. Patterson's smile as she led Jerry to his death. I remember the satisfaction on those faces in the dining room. I remember how easily I'd accepted it all because the meat tasted so good. And I remember that Miguel still wakes up some nights crying about being hungry in a way that regular food can't fix. That Sofia draws pictures of people eating each other and tells me they're happy families. The polar night changed everyone who lived through it. Maybe we're the lucky ones who escaped, or maybe we're the broken ones who couldn't adapt to what humanity needs to become to survive. I still dream about that rich, satisfying flavor. I wake up ashamed of my own hunger, terrified that someday I'll be desperate enough to go back. Because the truth is, it really did taste better than anything else I've ever eaten. And that scares me more than anything else that happened in Alaska.